The first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima.
Over humanity!
The fires of frustration and discord are burning in every
Let us
city.
not forget for a moment the toils and efforts that lie ahead.
They say that those who forget their history are condemned to repeat it. This is the History Lessons Podcast with certified financial planning practitioner Patrick Huey, author of History Lessons for the Modern Investor, and your guide to financial wisdom in the past, present, and future. You ready? Good. Let's get historical.
Historical? You're darn right it is. This is the History Lessons Podcast for the week of April 15th, 2024. I'm Patrick Huey, and I wrote the book, History Lessons for the Modern Investor. And if you're a modern investor seeking some historical perspective right now, friend, sit down, because you're in the right place. This week, we'll be talking about data eclipses, Scottish lessons, and the magic number.
But first, the news.
As the world recently witnessed the celestial spectacle of an eclipse, the U.S. economic landscape has been showing some spectacles of its own. No special glasses are needed, unless you prefer the rose-colored variety. Retail sales were the bright spot in March, and they unexpectedly surged, climbing 0.7% against forecasts of a more modest 0.4% increase. And this rise wasn't just a fluke, as revisions to previous months painted a picture of even stronger consumer spending, which means that retail sales growth was more like 1.3%. The spike in sales spanned across 8 of the 13 major categories, with non-store retailers encompassing online and mail order business leading the charge with a substantial 2.7% gain. Inflation indicators, well, they show that pressures still persist. The producer price index rose by a modest 0.2% in March, following a trend of higher increases in the prior months. That still put the first quarter of 2024 with a 4.4% annualized increase in producer prices, and a year-on-year comparison climbing back above 2% for the first time since last April. There are clear signs that producer price pressures are emerging back into the light. Meanwhile, the March Consumer Price Index, CPI, also painted a picture of re-accelerating inflation. Consumer prices increased by 0.4% for the month, pushing the year-over-year figure up to 3.5%. This uptick is a stark reminder that the dark days of inflation are far from over. Despite a significant reduction in consumer price inflation from 9.1% in mid-2022 to 3% by mid-2023, a recent bounce back to 3.5% underscores that the underlying inflation issues have not been fully resolved. As I've pointed out here before, there is still too much money, and supply chains are being challenged again. So will the Fed be blinded by the light? Hat tip to Manfred Mann. This robust consumer spending and accelerating inflation add a layer of complexity to the Federal Reserve's decision-making process. Initially, there was speculation about potential rate cuts starting in June, but the strong retail data may prompt a reconsideration of that, steering the Fed away from cutting rates too soon. Now, last week, I completely forgot about the eclipse, and I left the office and drove to a meeting. I was thousands of miles away from the full 100% eclipse experience anyway, but I kind of feel like I was much like today's monetary policy, a long way from the target and going in the wrong direction.
Interest rates are rising, and your annuity purchased in the last decade might not be keeping up, which means your financial plan may be falling behind. So if you own a deferred annuity, fixed, indexed, or variable worth more than $250,000, now is the time to review it and make sure it is doing all that it can for you and your financial plan. Let us help you keep your retirement on track. Introducing Victory Independent Planning. VIP turns complex financial matters into clear and confident solutions, so you can relax and enjoy retirement whenever it arrives. Get the Annuity Review Kit now. This complimentary kit includes a variety of checklists, resources, and ebooks to review the fees, features, and flexibility, or lack thereof, in your current annuity contract. It will even help you assess your overall investment goals and the people who are offering you advice. Get the kit today, because you can't teach an old annuity new tricks. To learn how VIP can help you review your annuity, click on the link in the show notes or go to victoryindependentplanning.com. That's victoryindependentplanning.com. Sign up for peace of mind today.
Alexa, charge the Wayback Machine and set it for 1611 AD.
Charging Wayback Machine.
On April 20th, 1611, William Shakespeare's tragedy Macbeth is performed for the first time at the Globe Theatre in London. Now, one of William Shakespeare's most famous and frequently performed tragedies, it's believed to have been written sometime between 1603 and 1607. The Bard's shortest tragedy is a nod toward James I. He was a Scot who ascended to the throne of England after the death of Queen Elizabeth I. The play is often considered one of Shakespeare's darkest works, deeply imbued with elements of the supernatural, political ambition, and moral corruption. Macbeth draws heavily on historical sources, particularly the works of Raphael Holinshed, whose chronicles Shakespeare used as a basis for many of his historical plays. However, the real Macbeth was a Scottish king from 1040 to 1057, whose rule was far more stable and less tyrannical than depicted in Shakespeare's play. Today, Macbeth retains a reputation for being unlucky, allegedly because the text uses the spells of real witches. It's still considered bad form to utter the actual name of the Scottish play while inside of a theater where it's not being performed. Okay, investing lessons from Shakespeare's Macbeth might not be immediately obvious, given its primary focus on ambition, power, and guilt. Then again, there may not be three better words to describe Wall Street. Anyway, several key investment insights can be extracted when we consider the themes and decisions driving the narrative. Here are 4 of them, along with quotes from the play. What's done cannot be undone. Well, just as Macbeth overextends himself based on the witch's sketchy predictions, some of us might rely a bit too heavily on speculative, risky investments touted by experts. Talk about unlucky. Which brings us to a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Macbeth is heavily influenced by the witches, whose equivocal prophecies lead him astray. And this highlights the importance of choosing advisors wisely and being critical of the sources and quality of the information on which your investment decisions are based. Avoid the bad actors, and above all, the false predictions. Let every man be master of his time. Macbeth is fixated on immediate power, neglecting the long-term implications of his actions, which ultimately lead to his destruction. Focusing solely on short-term gains can jeopardize a long-term wealth, especially if it means taking unsustainable risks or engaging in questionable practices. Confusion now hath made his masterpiece. Macbeth's actions caused immense psychological distress, which affected his decision-making a teeny bit. Similarly, investors should be aware of the emotional and psychological toll that investing can take, especially in volatile markets, so they can strive to maintain confidence and clarity.
Wayback Machine disengaged.
Returning to the year 2024.
Well, finally this week it's on to the mailbag.
You've got mail.
And this week's question was a popular one. Hey, I saw that I need $1.46 million now to retire. Is that true? Remember, if you're listening to this podcast and want to see the visuals referenced during this segment, please join us on Substack, where you can view the video version of this podcast, or on our YouTube channel, where you can do the same. Americans believe they will need $1.46 million to retire comfortably according to Northwestern Mutual 2024 Planning and Progress Study. Now, this article has seen a few iterations in a number of different websites. You can go out and Google your own particular version of it. But basically, it comes from this, which is the actual Northwest Mutual Planning and Progress Study for 2024. And indeed, when you look at work, retirement, and taxes, the amount expected for people to need to retire comfortably has gone to 1.46 million in 2024, up from 951,000 back in 2020. Obviously, that's a story because things have changed so much post-pandemic. Inflation is a factor, and people are feeling that pinch and thinking, well, geez, I'm just going to need more money than I thought I would potentially to retire the way I want to. But here's the problem I have with any of these articles that have this type of number. First of all, obviously, it's an average. Because if you read down, Gen Z and millennials expect to need more than 1.6 million to retire comfortably, those go-getters. And high net worth individuals, people with more than $1 million in investable assets, say they'll need more like $4 million. So this is an average. And anytime you're talking about averages, you really have to take it with a grain of salt. To prove it and see what 1.47 million is going to get you, let's take a look inside my financial planning software here and look at our very creatively named Joe and Jane. So Joe and Jane are looking at retiring. Okay, Joe is 64 and Jane is 63. They're both employed. Jane is the primary breadwinner. She brings in more than the limit on Social Security tax for her income, meaning by making $175,000 a year, she automatically qualifies for the highest Social Security payment available, at least in our model here. Okay, Joe does not. Joe is well below that number. So what we're modeling here is one primary breadwinner, one spouse, and together they're going to get the primary breadwinner's Social Security plus half of that full retirement full retirement amount at Social Security for the spouse via the spousal benefit. Okay, see this situation fairly often, and that's why we modeled it this way. Obviously, if your Social Security decisions are different than this, if you don't have one spouse who is over the max limit and one spouse who's far under it, your results are going to vary. Okay, so that's the first place where the numbers are going to matter as far as what your difference is from this scenario. The other place it's going to differ is your state of residence. Okay, I chose Pennsylvania, not out of any allegiance to my birth state, but simply because Pennsylvania ranks number 25, dead in the middle of the pack, when it comes to combined tax liabilities. Okay, so that's income tax, as well as property tax and those types of things. So Pennsylvania is the average. Okay. We're going to skip through the next couple screens because we're really just looking for an answer to our question. We're going to simulate them both retiring at the same age. Okay, so Jane's going to retire in the same year. Jane's going to retire at 65. Okay, she's going to do that in 2026. And Joe's going to retire at 67 in 2026. You can see that their life expectancies are over 30 years. So their money's got to last them quite a long time. Now, I know everybody wants to push back on me and say, there's no way that I am going to live to 90. But if you are a couple, like Joe and Jane are, there's a better than average chance that one of the two of you will make it into your 90s. And if we don't plan for that better than average chance, that's not being a fiduciary. That's taking chance that we don't need to take. That's putting risk into your overall plan that isn't appropriate for really anyone. Okay, unless you have some type of health issue, We're assuming that Joe and Jane do not at this point. Okay, so that's the setup. Now, what do Joe and Jane want? Joe and Jane want to be able to pay for their health care, and they want to be able to retire on something like, we're going to call it $125,000 a year together. Now, that number will step down when one of the spouses times out due to their life expectancy. And we adjust that by about 25% to incorporate that. But that's really only for a couple of years, because in this case, Joe and Jane are fairly similar in age. Okay, so we're trying to get healthcare paid for out of pocket. Remember, even though you're on Medicare, there are still out-of-pocket expenses. Those expenses for a couple over a 30-year retirement can exceed $250,000. So we build in those averages when we're running these types of scenarios. Okay, so if you think about it, it makes sense. You're thinking about $10,000 a year in expenses over 30 years, that's $300,000, right? That's your out-of-pocket expenses outside of your Medicare that's going to come out of your Social Security. All right, let's move on from that. If you have questions, feel free, shoot me an email, send me a message. You can find me somewhere, go on the website. Certainly am happy to answer any questions as we go through this. Okay, Social Security, we got that plugged in. They're both going to take at age 70 in order to maximize their benefits. Why 70? In general, okay, now there are some nuances to this, but in general, if you've got a fairly large bucket of liquid investable funds, it usually, and you're fairly conservative or moderate with your investments, it usually makes sense to hang on before taking Social Security and maximize that benefit, even though you're drawing down your funds. Okay, there's a break-even point for that. And basically, if you're going to be in your 90s, you need to expect to get more than about a 6% rate of return living into your 90s for that to change and you to take your Social Security at your full retirement age versus age 70. That full retirement age is around 67 or so now. Okay? All right. Let's check out our investment assets. Now, I'm going to run this two ways, and that's why you're going to see two different things here. You're going to see a 401k for Jane with $1.46 million in it, right? That was the number back here, 1.46. Okay. You also see this Roth IRA with $1. I'm going to rerun this scenario after we see how much you can spend, from the IRA, from the 401k. We're going to run this with Roth and see how much it goes up. Okay. And I haven't done this yet, so I'll be just as surprised and delighted as you will. Okay, that's it for that. Net worth 1.46. Again, we're not counting a house. We're not doing any of that stuff. Household risk. Again, we're looking at a fairly moderate risk profile with an average return under 6%. Again, that led us to the decision to go ahead and take Social Security later. But you can see even that, balanced, fairly moderate type of portfolio with a 5.5% rate of return, because that's a pretty nasty years. And if you go through one of those, you could potentially, Jane and Joe could see themselves, losing up to and over $300,000. So risk management is an issue. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. So let's look at our results. Your simple question, can I fund all my goals without running out of money? Drum roll, please. No, you can't. Okay, so we know that you cannot spend that much money off of that $1.46 million that we put in as far as the investable amount. So let's take a look and see what you could do. What's going to get you to that 82% probability of success that you saw, which is where I put in this. Okay. And that spending number goes down to $100,000 a year instead of $125,000. And when Jane's alone, it drops to $75,000. So what are we saying here? Well, we're saying that this number is correct. $1.46 million is the number if you want to spend $100,000 in basic living expenses and fund your health care in retirement, and you have the Social Security profile we outlined earlier for Joe and Jane. Okay. Otherwise, as the saying goes, your results may vary. Okay. For the record, this is a perfectly acceptable retirement plan profile. You've got 100% funding when you measure by average returns. You've got 100% funding when you measure by bad timing. And you've got a 82% probability of success, well within the confidence zone when we run a Monte Carlo analysis. This is just about as lock solid as you can get. We don't expect to see people up in the blue band very often. It does happen, but this is just fine. No retirement planning specialist I know is going to look at these numbers and say, 82% is not good enough there. It's well within tolerances. So what happens then if we go back and we swap out our investment assets, and I take the 401k and I make that go away? We'll take that down to $1. Sorry, Jane. And then we're going to take the Roth and we're going to bump that up to the 1.46 million. All right, 1.46. Yep. Always got to double check my work. Okay. Right, now we've got 1.46 in the Roth. Let's take a look at our results. The original scenario goes up nicely, up to 57%. Our secondary scenario with $100,000 in spending goes well into the confidence zone, right? Probably to the point where I want to go in there and say, well, okay, I can spend more than $100,000 then. Let's go see what we can spend. Okay, we're going to lock all these. And we're going to say, what happens like that as well. All right, if you had that 1.46 million in a Roth instead of a traditional, now you could spend about $10,000 more than that $100,000 we calculated, right? $109,375 per year in retirement instead of $100,000. So the Roth is certainly going to help. I'm not going to update that scenario. Okay, so let's break it down. I think this from the Wall Street Journal says it all. We just went through it to prove it. But the new magic number for retirement is 1.46 million. Here's what it tells us. It tells us that there's no single formula for how much you need to save in your 401k or your Roth 401k or your IRA, 403b, 401a, etc. There's just no magic formula because, again, everyone and everyone's case is just a little bit different. Well, my fellow historians, that's all for this week. Be sure to check out my book, History Lessons for the Modern Investor. That's still on Amazon. And be sure to do all the social stuff with us. Please like this episode, Follow me wherever you see or hear your podcasts. We're available on Substack, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Till next week, when we'll take another rollicking romp through the past and make an investment in your future with history lessons for the modern
See you
investor.
next week.